Have you ever noticed on food or even on like milk cartons that there's a date printed, best if used by? And you would want what you were eating, or especially what you were drinking, you'd want to eat it or drink it before it had expired. And have you ever thought about our devotional life, our prayer life, and our Christian experience in that way? That our experience could actually become stale or out of date? If you think about that, the Holy Spirit in our lives is a daily matter. It's a need that we have. And praying isn't merely asking for blessings that we could receive, but rather asking blessings that we could give.
Jesus was the perfect example of what it meant to be daily filled with the Holy Spirit in order to impart life and light to others. Jesus would spend long hours in prayer so that in the daily struggles of life, he could meet the needs of others. And in fact, his prayer life was so powerful that his disciples in Luke chapter 11 asked him, "Jesus, could you teach us to pray?"
Jesus answers, and he begins sharing the Lord's Prayer that he gave on the Sermon on the Mount. And then he uses two illustrations to further teach the lesson that he wanted his disciples to understand. In the first example, he gives in Luke chapter 11, verses 5 to 8. And this is what he says. "Which of you shall have a friend and go to him at midnight and say, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has come to me on his journey, and I have nothing to set before him.' And he will answer from within and say, 'Do not trouble me now. The door is shut. My children are with me in bed. I cannot arise and give to you.' I say to you, though he will not rise and give him because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence, he will rise and give him as many as he needs." You know, it's interesting that Jesus here is pointing out that the person who is asking, the petitioner, is asking not for his own need, but for the need of his friend. And even though the neighbor is not willing to give it, his persistence is what pays off.
In the same way, the disciples were to ask blessings from God. God had made known to them what their work should be, which was to impart the bread of heaven to the people. But Jesus knew that oftentimes they would be in unexpected situations where they would recognize their human inadequacy. The example of the selfish neighbor isn't a comparison to God, but a contrast. Jesus, wanting to strengthen our confidence in asking for a blessing from God, invites us to approach him with a new name. He gives us the privilege of calling the infinite God our Father. And that's why when we come to God in sincere faith, asking for God's favor and blessing, it is music to his ears.
You know, the life of Jesus has shown us clearly what humanity can be with having the divine nature. All of the promises and blessings that Jesus received, we can have too. So then let's ask so that we could receive in the persistent faith like Jacob, or the unyielding confidence like Elijah. Let's request these blessings of God so that we can receive them.
Our mission to the world is not to serve out of self-gratification, but to glorify God by cooperating with Jesus in order to reach others. We ask not to receive, but to give. The reality is that the capacity to receive is only preserved to those that are willing to impart. And that is why we cannot receive the heavenly treasures without first wanting to share it with others.
You know, it's also important to remember that prayer isn't about changing God, but prayer is actually about bringing us into harmony with him and his will. You know, many times when we have a prayer request or a blessing that we're asking for, God sees clearly that there's something in our life that would prevent us from receiving his blessing. So he takes us into trial and into difficulty, into humiliation, so that we can clearly see the places that the Holy Spirit is not being able to live through our life. And so I want to invite you to join us today in asking God to fill us with his Holy Spirit and in those blessings, not so that we can just receive them, but that we can be a blessing to everyone we come in contact with today.